Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Number the Lighthouse Keeper's Log. I've been the keeper of the Pemaquid Point Lighthouse for 15 years now. 15 years of solitude, of watching the waves crash against the jagged Maine coastline, of maintaining the light that guides ships safely past our treacherous shores. 15 years of peace until 3 months ago. The first anomaly appeared on a Tuesday. A dense fog had rolled in from the east, the kind that swallows everything, sound, light, time itself. I'd switched on the foghorn as protocol dictated and settled in for a long night of reduced visibility. Around 2:17 a.m., I spotted a vessel through my binoculars, moving steadily through the mist. Nothing unusual about that. Except for the vessel itself, it was a whaling ship. Not a modern fishing trawler retrofitted for whale-watching tour, but an honest-to-God 19th-century wooden whaling vessel, complete with harpoon launchers and rendering vats. The kind that hadn't sailed these waters in over a century. I blinked, adjusted my binoculars. The ship was still there, its sails billowing despite the lack of wind. I could make out figures moving on deck, dark silhouettes against the ship's yellowed lamps. I reached for the radio to contact the Coast Guard about this bizarre historical reenactment sailing without running lights, when the fog thickened suddenly. When it cleared moments later, the ship was gone. I convinced myself I'd seen a ghost ship, not a supernatural phenomenon, but one of those tourist attractions they sometimes sail up the coast during summer. The fog had played tricks on my eyes, that's all. I didn't even bother noting it in my log. That was my first mistake. A week later, it happened again. Different vessel this time, a steam-powered paddle-wheel riverboat, the kind that hasn't traversed these waters since the Civil War. It appeared from the south, chugging along as if it had every right to be there, black smoke puffing from its twin stacks. I could hear the churning of the paddle wheel, the distant strains of what sounded like a calliope. This time I radioed the Coast Guard. They reported no vessels matching that description anywhere along the eastern seaboard. While I was still on the radio with them, the boat vanished into another bank of fog. Must have been a mirage, the Coast Guard operator suggested. Happens sometimes in certain atmospheric conditions. I agreed, if only to end the conversation without sounding like I was losing my mind, but I knew what I'd seen. And I knew it wasn't a mirage. That night I made my second mistake. I noted the sighting in my official log, complete with time, coordinates, and a detailed description of the vessel. The third sighting came 3 nights later. A clipper ship, its multiple masts reaching toward the starless sky like skeletal fingers. It moved silently, impossibly, against both wind and current. Through my binoculars, I could see figures on the deck, gaunt, motionless figures that seemed to be staring directly at the lighthouse. Directly at me. I didn't radio anyone this time. Instead, I consulted the lighthouse archives, dusty logbooks dating back to when Pemaquid Point was first established in 1827. I searched for similar accounts, any mention of phantom ships or maritime anomalies. What I found chilled me more than the October wind that howled outside. Every keeper before me had recorded similar sightings. Ships that shouldn't exist, appearing and disappearing in fog or darkness. The entries began sporadically, one every few years, but increased in frequency over time. The last keeper before me, Harold Thorne, had logged 17 sightings in his final year. The Coast Guard had attributed Harold's sudden retirement to health concerns. The official report mentioned something about paranoid delusions. I'd never met the man, but there were rumors among the maritime community that he'd suffered some kind of breakdown. Now I understood why. I closed the archives and returned to my post. That night I saw 2 more vessels, a Portuguese caravel and what appeared to be a Viking longship, both moving against the tide, both vanishing when I tried to track them with the lighthouse's spotlight. The sightings continued, increasing in frequency. 2 weeks in, I was logging 3 to 4 vessels per night. None appeared on radar, none responded to radio calls. All were ships from bygone eras, some recognizable from history books, others so ancient or unusual I couldn't identify them. I began photographing them. The first batch of digital photos showed nothing but fog and darkness. I switched to my old film camera, but those images came back from development blank as well. It was as if these ships existed only for my eyes. 1 month into the phenomenon, I noticed a pattern. The ships were appearing closer to shore with each sighting, as if testing the boundaries of some invisible barrier. And they all seemed to be converging on the lighthouse itself. I started having dreams, vivid nightmares of drowning, of being pulled beneath black waters by pale hands while distant ships watched impassively. I'd wake gasping for breath, my sheets soaked with sweat that smelled of brine. 6 weeks in, I made my third mistake. I stopped logging the ships altogether. There were simply too many, appearing at all hours now, not just at night. My log had become a litany of phantom vessels, times, coordinates. Reading back through it felt like documenting my own descent into madness. Instead, I began a private journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my quarters. In it, I recorded not just the ships but my theories about them. Were they actual ghosts, some kind of mass hallucination, a tear in the fabric of time? I needed answers, so I researched the history of Pemaquid Point beyond the official records. The indigenous Abenaki people had considered this headland cursed long before European settlers arrived. They called it the place where ships go to die. Local folklore was rife with tales of phantom vessels and drowned sailors who returned to shore. Then I found the newspaper archives. Since the lighthouse's construction in 1827, there had been 23 keepers before me. Of those, 8 had died while in service, an unusually high number. 3 had fallen from the tower in separate incidents, 2 had drowned, 1 had hanged himself in the keeper's quarters. The remaining 2 had died of apparently natural causes, though both were relatively young men. Of the 15 who hadn't died at their post, 12 had been removed due to mental health concerns or unsuitability for continued service. Only 3 had served full terms and retired normally. I was beginning to understand that I was part of a pattern, a cycle, and if the pattern held true, my own fate was already sealed. By the 2-month mark, the ships had begun to change. They looked wrong, hulls twisted at impossible angles. Masts bent like broken limbs, sails that moved against the wind, rippling like liquid rather than cloth, and the crews. God help me, the crews. Through my binoculars, I could see them clearly now. Pale figures with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Some were bloated, others desiccated, as if they'd been simultaneously drowned and mummified. They moved in jerky, unnatural ways, like marionettes controlled by unseen hands. And they watched me, always watched me. I stopped using the binoculars after that. I didn't need them anyway. The ships were coming close enough to see with the naked eye, hovering just beyond the rocks, sometimes staying for hours before vanishing. I hadn't left the lighthouse in weeks. My supply boat came monthly, but I'd asked them to leave the provisions on the dock. I couldn't bear to face another human being, to try to explain what was happening. Or worse, to discover that what was happening was all in my mind. Then came the night of the storm. A nor'easter had been building all day, and by nightfall it hit with full force. Waves crashed against the rocks, sending spray higher than the lighthouse tower. The wind screamed like a living thing in pain, perfect conditions for a shipwreck. I kept the light burning bright, sweeping its beam across the churning waters, though I knew no sane captain would be sailing in such conditions. But the ships came anyway, dozens of them, more than I'd ever seen at once, forming a semicircle around the point. They didn't rock with the waves, they didn't struggle against the wind, they simply existed, immune to the physical world around them, and they were all facing the lighthouse, facing me. I watched in horror as figures began disembarking from the nearest vessels. Pale, waterlogged forms dropping into the raging sea, but not sinking, walking. They were walking on the water, moving toward shore with the same jerky, unnatural gait I'd observed on their decks. I ran to the radio room and sent out a mayday call. The Coast Guard responded immediately, but their transmission was broken, distorted. "Repeat your emergency." "There are ships," I said, my voice cracking. "Dozens of them. Ghost ships and their crews are coming ashore. They're coming for me." Static hissed back at me. Then, "No vessels on radar. Confirm your status." "They won't show up on radar," I explained, knowing how insane I sounded. They're not natural. Please, you have to send help." More static. Then a different voice, older, authoritative. "This is Commander Hargrove. Who am I speaking with?" "Daniel Marlowe, Pemaquid Point Lighthouse." A long pause, then, "Mr. Marlowe, we have no record of a Daniel Marlowe assigned to Pemaquid Point." My blood ran cold. "That's impossible. I've been here 15 years. "Sir, according to our records, Pemaquid Point Lighthouse was automated in 1934. There hasn't been a keeper stationed there in nearly 90 years. The radio slipped from my numb fingers. I staggered to the logbook, flipping through pages of my own handwriting. Daily entries stretching back 15 years, weather reports. Maintenance records, ship sightings, but the dates were wrong. The most recent entry was dated October 17, 1934. I ran to my quarters, pulled up the loose floorboard, and retrieved my private journal. The first entry was dated 3 months ago, August 3, 2023. How could both be true? The lighthouse windows rattled as the storm intensified. I forced myself to look outside. The walking figures had reached the shore. Dozens of them now gathering at the base of the lighthouse. Their movements were more fluid now, more human, as if proximity to land was restoring something they'd lost at sea. I could hear them, not over the howling wind, under it. A low, constant murmuring that seemed to come from inside my own head. Words I couldn't quite make out, but their meaning was clear. They wanted in, they wanted me. I barricaded the door with furniture, though some part of me knew it wouldn't matter. These weren't physical beings that could be stopped by physical barriers. The murmuring grew louder, resolving into distinct voices, hundreds of them overlapping, each telling their own story of death at sea. shipwrecks, drownings, suicides, murders. So many ways to die in the endless dark of the ocean, and beneath all the voices, a single message repeated, "Join us." I retreated to the top of the tower, to the light itself. Its powerful beams swept over the assembled ships, now so numerous they formed an unbroken line along the horizon. An impossible armada from every era of maritime history. The figures had begun climbing the tower. I could hear their wet, slapping footsteps on the spiral staircase. The murmuring had become a chant now, rhythmic and hypnotic. "Join us, join us, join us." I barricaded the trapdoor leading up to the lantern room and checked my watch. 2:17 a.m., the exact time I'd spotted the first phantom ship 3 months ago. The trapdoor began to bulge inward, as if under enormous pressure. Water seeped through the seams, not dripping but flowing upward, defying gravity. I backed against the glass walls of the lantern room, the massive Fresnel lens between me and the trapdoor. Through the lens, I could see the door warping, stretching, becoming something organic and alive. It burst open. They poured into the room like a tide, not individuals anymore, but a single mass of pale flesh and seaweed and tattered clothing. Faces emerged from the mass only to be reabsorbed. Hands reached for me, then melted back into the hole. The chanting was deafening now. "Join US, join US, join US." I scrambled onto the gallery outside the lantern room, the narrow walkway that circled the top of the tower. The storm raged around me, rain and sea spray soaking me instantly. Below, the rocks were invisible beneath churning white water. The mass followed, oozing through the doorway onto the gallery. It moved with purpose now, herding me toward the edge. I looked out at the phantom armada. Every ship was illuminated from within, glowing with an otherworldly light that no storm could diminish. I understood then what they were, not ghosts. Not hallucinations, they were waypoints, markers on a journey I was about to take. The mass of former humanity surged forward. I felt cold, wet hands on my back pushing. I fell. The descent lasted both an instant and an eternity. I saw my life not flashing before my eyes, but spreading out beneath me like the dark waters of the Atlantic. I saw my 15 years of solitude at the lighthouse. I saw the moment I'd arrived, young and eager for the isolation, running from a world that had taken everything from me, and I saw what came before, the shipwreck, the struggle to stay afloat as hypothermia set in. The moment I'd given up and let the waters take me. I hit the water, but I didn't die. I should have. The fall alone should have killed me, and if not that, then the rocks, the cold, the currents. Instead, I found myself standing on the shore, looking up at Pemaquid Point Lighthouse. Its beams swept across the now calm waters, regular as a heartbeat. I wasn't alone. The others were there, all the lost souls from all the phantom ships. No longer a horrific mass, but individuals again. Men and women from across centuries, all victims of the sea. "You understand now," said a voice beside me. I turned to see an old man in the uniform of a lighthouse keeper from another era. "Harold Thorne," I said, recognizing him from a photograph I'd seen in the archives. He nodded. "And all the others before me, we all serve our time." "Time for what?" "Guiding the lost," said another voice, a woman in Victorian dress, her skin blue-tinged. "Those who die at sea need guidance to find their way beyond." "The lighthouse," I whispered. Harold nodded again. "Not the physical structure, the light, the keeper, they're one and the same." I looked down at my hands. They were pale, bloodless. "I'm dead, have been for 90 years, Harold confirmed. "Since your ship went down in 34, but you weren't ready to move on. None of us were, so we serve as keepers until we're ready. And the ships, the people I saw, the ones who came before us, the ones who have been waiting for you to remember, to understand, to join them. And now," Harold gestured toward the assembled ships, their spectral glow casting the cove in ethereal light. "Now you have a choice, continue as keeper until the next lost soul washes up on these shores, or move on with the rest of us." "Move on where?" Harold smiled. "That's the journey we've all been waiting to take." I looked back at the lighthouse. For 15 years or 90, depending on how you counted, it had been my whole world, my prison and my sanctuary. "What happens to the light if I leave?" I asked. "It never goes out," said the Victorian woman. "There's always another keeper, always another lost soul who needs time before they can accept what comes next." I turned toward the phantom armada. They no longer seemed menacing or wrong. They were simply waiting, patient, eternal. "I'm ready," I said, as when we moved toward the water's edge. I expected to feel cold as the waves lapped at my feet, but there was no sensation at all. We waded deeper, the assembled vessels drawing closer to shore as if to meet us halfway. I didn't look back at the lighthouse. I didn't need to. I knew someone else would be there soon, keeping the light, seeing the ships, beginning the long process of remembering and accepting. We reached the nearest vessel, the whaling ship I'd first spotted 3 months ago. Hands reached down to help us aboard. Faces smiled in welcome. As I set foot on the deck, I felt a weight lift from me. 90 years of confusion and denial gone in an instant. The ship turned away from shore, joining the others as they formed a line pointing out to sea. to whatever waited beyond. I stood at the rail watching the lighthouse grow smaller in the distance. Its beams still swept the waters, regular as a heartbeat, guiding the lost, guiding me home. But even as our spectral armada sailed toward whatever lay beyond, I felt a nagging doubt. A whisper that this journey, like my time at the lighthouse, might be another form of purgatory, another waiting room, another illusion, because the ships were changing again. Subtly at first, a mast slightly too tall, a hull bending at an impossible angle. The crew members' smiles stretching too wide, their eyes growing hollow, and beneath the sounds of sail and sea I heard it again. That murmuring, that chant, "Join US, join US, join US," I looked back toward shore. The lighthouse was gone, swallowed by darkness. There was no light to guide us now, no way back, only forward into the endless night with my new companions who might not be what they seemed. I had made my fourth and final mistake. I had joined them, and now I understood why the indigenous people had called this the place where ships go to die. Not because ships ended their journeys here, but because they began them, eternal journeys with no destination. No resolution, no escape. The chanting grew louder as our ship sailed into the void, one more phantom vessel in an endless damned procession. Join US, join US, join US, and I had, God help me, I had.